but it's open at the testing center for you to take one.
Okay.
Same with the final. 12 and the final are open for you guys to take whenever.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Go ahead, Byron.
Okay, so guys, I'm in the CAC Honors Program here, and we have the program mostly based out of the Apache Junction campus and Signal Peak campus. And so basically what the Honors Program entails is you have to take 2 colloquial segments, Honors 204 and 205, and then you have to do 3 creative projects, 3 honors seminars, Honors 201, 202, and 203. So this is my second one, and yeah, so I'm going to be presenting to you my project on mathematics and the human supercomputer. Okay, so for a bit of an introduction here, mathematics is near limitless in application. Geometry to construction, algebra to discovery and analysis of like verity or truth, statistics to likelihoods, so on and so forth. Mathematics is a human resource and tool, and the methodology, the system, the tool, it's only sensible to us humans. And the tool is only applicable to what we subjectively see as the world around us, our own unique view. And math facilitates expressions and quantifications of contrasts, comparisons, and similarities. So like the relationships between entities, like non-real and real entities, they could be from your mind, your body, your soul, whatever. So math was birthed by man, we created it. Therefore math cannot have a preceding transcendent logical precedence. So what I mean by saying that is math didn't exist until we made it. But you could say that our interpretation of math, like the origin of that logic, could have existed before us in the sensible world, in biology, in ecosystems, so on and so forth. Okay, so I tend to say math exists as we know it. Math is perceived as true if one disregards solipsism and endeavors and belief/acceptance of a common reality based on surety and pragmatism. So what I mean by saying that is math is true if you believe in the human world, if you believe in identity and subjectivity, so on and so forth. However, the human standard of mathematics, in accordance with like the Schrodinger interpretation, which is like every time you raise your hand, there's like 3 realities where it's different. It's like I raise my hand and like the classroom explodes. I raise my hand and like nothing happens, so on and so forth. So that's like Schrodinger and like the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. So yeah, it can be variable in form or expression. Math represents the human modes of analysis and interpretation in relation to our reality here. So like I said earlier, comparison, contrast, the relationship between entities and ideas. So in this paper, in this project, I aimed to explore and define some of the things I was talking about before. And I asked myself these research questions here. So how does math aid in understanding the relationships or lack of relationships between real and non-real things? How can conditional statements, those if and then statements with the supporting details, like if I go outside, I will get cold, or if I go outside and I bring a jacket, then I will get cold, like so on and so forth. And I asked myself how does mathematics support developing potentially altered critical analyses? So like does understanding math and logic, for instance, like you learn in Math 118 or even a little bit in Math 141, I think, how could that alter the way you live your life and the way you see things and evaluate problems or conflicts? And I also looked at like famous propositions from these great Greek philosophers like Phidias, Zeno, Pythagoras with the Pythagorean theorem, and how they could relate to those conditional statements, truth, value, like the value of a truth, what something is, whether it's logical or not, tautology, Euclidean geometry, which is the geometry you're probably familiar with, like triangles, squares, the flat paper perspective, and then yeah, the Boolean conditionals. Okay, so here for a little history, Phidias, who I mentioned earlier, was a Greek sculptor and mathematician who was thought to have applied phi to the design of sculptures for the Parthenon. And so phi was this magic number that made everything just look really pretty, those perfect rectangles, squares, whatever. And Plato considered the golden ratio, or Phidias' application of phi, to be the most universally binding in mathematical relationships. So he assented, he agreed that it was beautiful and perfect and great and fancy. Okay, so however, if you look deep, you see that the true origin of the golden ratio was with the Egyptians. And it's similar to Pythagoras with his Pythagorean theorem. And I talked to Professor Gamble about this a lot, how people discover things that have been around for years. Like I think one thing he referenced was something with the stars, but they were finding stuff like that in the caveman walls, but Galileo took credit for it or whatever. There was heavy debate surrounding the true origin of a great number of mathematical proofs, discoveries, and propositions. And the idea of intellectual thievery and swashbuckling is as old as time, truly. However, it's not fair to accuse Pythagoras and Phidias of plagiarism, as many intellectuals have discovered things that already existed. So it's not really their fault, but it just doesn't translate well. So William Shakespeare is a victim of the aforementioned too, for a little perspective. and now Zeno and his paradoxes. So the first paradox was the dichotomy paradox. Before an object can travel a given distance d, and this is similar to the, I think it's the conch snowflake, it must travel half the distance d in order to travel d2, it must travel d4, so on to infinity. So since this sequence goes on forever, it just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's getting smaller, but there's more distance to travel in a way every time you take a step. The resolution of this paradox is weighted calculus, and the proof that infinite geometric series can converge so that the infinite number of path steps needed is balanced by the increasing short amount of time needed to traverse the distances. The second paradox is the story of Achilles and the tortoise, or as most people know it, the tortoise and the hare. Achilles was unable to catch the tortoise, which has been given a head start, since during the time it takes Achilles to catch up to a given position, the tortoise has moved forward the exact distance Achilles has progressed. The paradox is meant to display the relationship or limits of time-space relativity. The resolution is similar to that of dichotomy paradox. A lot of these just needed calculus, but in the time, these paradoxes were like world-breaking and very existential and philosophical and all that jazz. The third is the arrow paradox. So this is one I was really a fan of because in this paper, in this project, I really focused on the reasoning side of mathematics, and this contributes to that a lot. So Zeno said, an arrow in flight has an instantaneous position at a given instant of time. At that instant, however, it is indistinguishable from a motionless arrow in the same position. So how is the motion of the arrow perceived? In the arrow paradox, Zeno purports, which is to falsely support or falsely supply the idea of something. For motion to occur, an object must change the position within which the object occupies. Thus, in Zeno's example of an arrow in flight, he then states that in any one durationless or without progression, so if like you froze time, instant time, or like you took a snapshot of reality at a given point in time, the arrow is either moving to where it is or to where it is not or was, which is crazy to think about that. It's like, you can kind of think about life as like, it's real, like a movie. Like there's a bunch of these little stamps, these little pictures. So you take one of those pictures out, it existed, it happened, it was a moment of time that passed. Yet all the same, it was its own solitary moment that existed on its own, and it was unmoving, stationary. So finally, the fourth paradox, the stadium paradox. This one is pretty simple, not too big, but Zeno purports that space and that which occupies space can only be divided by a definite amount. So that means like, for instance, when you get those answers in math, we get like 4/0, and it's undefined. It's not a definite amount.
That's why you can't divide by a radical. Remember, you got to rationalize the denominator. You can't have radical 7 in the denominator.
Exactly. And then onwards to the Pythagorean theorem, which was originally credited, like I said earlier, the real Genesis, or the quote-unquote real Genesis with the Egyptians, was originally credited to Pythagoras of Samos, this Greek philosopher mathematician. And it was a fundamental relation in Euclidean geometry regarding the sides of the right triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, all that good stuff. And then conditional statements, tautology, and truth value. So you could try and search for someone to take credit for all this, but you really can't, because this is ingrained in our human biology, like analyzing problems, conflicts, so on and so forth, to find the best end or the best result. No one can really take credit for that. That's something you're born with, or something you develop over time from the people around you. Not one person in particular from history can own logic or critical analysis. And then moving onward, okay, so Euclid, the father of geometry, and his 5 postulates. So these are really big, and there were way more than 5, but these are the significant ones. I think he had like 400 something propositions in his lifetime, which is like unheard of. Like no one's ever contributed that much to mathematics. Now a lot of them aren't like proven or proofs. A lot of them are speculative, but even so, they're still very impressive. So the first postulate was a straight line segment can be drawn joining any 2 points. The second postulate, any straight line segment can be extended indefinitely in a straight line. The third postulate, given any straight line segment, a circle can be drawn having the segment as radius and one endpoint as center. The fourth, all right angles are congruent with equilateral triangles. If two lines are drawn which intersect a third in such a way that sum of the inner angles on one side is less than the 2 right angles, and the 2 lines inevitably must intersect each other on that side if extended far enough. This postulate is equivalent to what is known as the parallel postulate. And the parallel postulate is a postulate that's had a lot of discussion, a lot of discourse around it, and it wasn't really combated until Gauss, and that's the big brain behind like the Gaussian elimination method and all that stuff, all that jazz. He was the first to really ask himself, well, why does Euclid's geometry only work on a flat piece of paper? So he started to look at the world as this saddle kind of thing, which I think I have right here. So he was one who proposed hyperbolic geometry. And then elliptic geometry is in a similar headspace, but I don't think Gauss took credit for that one. But this is the Euclidean plane, the flat paper perspective, so to speak, because Euclid's postulates and phi, pi, Pythagorean theorem were only sensible with this flat plane. Yeah, so that's the significance behind that. Literature review. So, okay, so now moving on to the implications and applications of my project. So I began each of these little paragraphs with a statement of sorts. So I said for this first one, human machinations, proofs, and perspectives are trivially true. So I essentially am saying human ideas are trivially true. What is a trivial truth and what is the value of a truth? A strong example of a trivial truth is ethical egoism. Ethical egoism is the philosophy or belief system within which one, as in a practitioner or propagator, holds the self such a societally confirmed notion that self-interest pilots or directs human life to be undeniably true. Ethical egoists falsely report that there exist two forms of transcendent, omniscient self-interest, functional and dysfunctional. Functional and dysfunctional self-interest is comedically far from being the one-weighted decryption of the human spirit. To discern between two entities, real or non-real, some form of distinction, logical dissent, or conditional negation must exist. So there has to be two clear, definite differences to make two entities separate. The difference alluded to with regards to ethical egoism is functional and dysfunctional self-interest, right and wrong, good and bad. And there exists a very real problem in claiming that all existence is either good or bad, right or wrong, so on and so forth, and denying any form of ethical/perceptual transcendence or existential grade. And the problem is, good or bad, right and wrong is very subjective. And that's why this ethical egoism is a trivial truth, because a trivial truth is something that only works in a certain situation. It's like a blanket truth. It makes sense in situations, but it's not the answer to a problem. It's not the true analysis. And the reason ethical egoism is a trivial truth is because, like I said earlier, right and wrong is very subjective. For instance, there's these islands in Africa where people eat each other, and cannibalism is fine, and missionaries go there and they chop their heads off, and like that's cool for them. But obviously, if they did that here, that's not acceptable. We'd throw them in prison. So we can't put everyone into this functional or dysfunctional categories. Okay, so moving on here, axioms are paradoxical. So an axiom is something that's believed to be in a society undeniably true, like murder is bad, or 2 + 2 is 4. Like we all believe those things to be true. But like I said earlier, since there's so much subjectivity in human life and ideas and thought and logic, axioms aren't possible. And an example of an axiom is morality, like I said earlier, right and wrong. Morality is a social construct, and because of this fact, ethical egoism is a trivial truth, has firm footholds in morality, and morality is socialized. We acquire morality from our peers and our society. Therefore, morality is what those around us tell us it is, what our parents tell us it is, our teachers, our mentors, our guardians, so on and so forth. One believes that which one is raised upon, and one believes that which is positively, negatively reinforced and conditioned. You know, you do something bad, you get a spanking, you're not going to do it again. Therefore, views and understanding upon surrounding morality, right and wrong, functional, dysfunctional, differs from culture to culture. Therefore, morality is not unanimous. Therefore, predication of argument upon the distinction between the universally true functional and dysfunctional self-interest facilitates falsity. A parallel to the aforementioned, subjectively true self-interest could not be possible either. So that would be like the counter-argument to what I was saying. Functionality and dysfunctionality cannot be subjective because of the actual nature of subjectivity. Because we would never have the same definition of functionality and dysfunctionality. So even if it was subjective, we still couldn't put each other in these categories. So to be subjective is to be in alignment with personal taste, viewpoint, and opinion. Therefore, subjective functionality and dysfunctionality is self-contradictory because every entity would have a different perception of functionality and dysfunctionality. However, if one retreats into the slums of solipsism, the idea or proportion that one's reality is undeniably true because only oneself can experience and confirm one's reality. So only I know I'm real because only I can be in my head. I can't get Professor Campbell's head and confirm his existence, so I could be schizophrenic, like in a padded cell screaming right now, and I wouldn't know. The views of ethical egoism make sense and are true. If one accepts the communists, not communists like Soviet Russia, the communists, more like 1984, that book, human reality is unfaltering true, it's sensible to state organic life acts in pursuit of personal interest. Therefore, ethical egoism is a trivial truth or a comfort blanket truth. It only makes sense in our human world, not in these primal biological ecosystems, so on and so forth, with like coyotes and wolves and all that. Truth has a value that one subjectively and situationally ascribes to it. One need only believe, and one has penultimate truth. So now more on the mathematical side here. Integers, decimals, and fractions can be trivially viewed as the basis of reality. And integers, decimals, and fractions can be used to express the differences and similarities between real and non-real entities. So what I mean to say here is, like, real and non-real instruments and integers can be used to express, define, or quantify the ideas or applications of comparison and contrast. So I'm not saying that there's ones and zeros everywhere, more so that we could use those ones and zeros to kind of explain or symbolically label our world. Like 1, I'm holding a pen, 0, I'm not holding a pen. Or the square root of 64 is 8. You're 64 years old now, but you used to be 8 years old, something like that. For example, the number 1 can represent existence of verity, right? And the inverse or reverse of that number can be used to express non-existence of falsity. So that example of binary 1, 0. The previous ideas or expressions are not limited to 1 either. For instance, this could be a 7, and not holding it could be a 5. One as an individual could make the generalization that all real numbers could represent existence, verity, and all the in-betweens. And one could also make the generalization that all negative real numbers could represent non-existence or falsity. So there's a lot of subjectivity there. You can make it mean whatever you wanted to. One can make the generalization that the in-betweeners, that is the relationships, expressions, or left there between numbers, complex numbers, and imaginary numbers, represent, define, or even decomplexify, / decode the human psyche and its perception of the physical world around it. So like imaginary numbers, that can represent our abstract ideas and thoughts, the things we can't put into the physical world, like our ideas of superheroes, so on and so forth. For existence, 1/2 could represent 1/2 of an idea, object, or entity that previously existed as a whole. The square root of a number could have many philosophical implications as well with regards to age and thought processes. Like my example of you were 164, the square root of that is 8. You were 8 at one point as well. It's like 2 different existences, but the same lifeline, timeline. It's important to note that human understanding is limited. Humans can only understand human things using human methods, and everything an individual knows or will ever know and is known by in relation to other things one knows. So that's that deductive reasoning. Everything we learn is based off of something else we learned, or everything we figure out is we figure out using things we already know. So a good example of that is attempt to define the word define. You'd have to use other words. Another example, attempt to explain why numbers look and operate the way they do, like Sanskrit. We could explain one human idea or entity by using one word for the existing society of such entities. Okay. All right, now the golden ratio, in accordance with Aristotelian philosophy, is a resolution to humanity's solipsism-induced paradox. So Aristotle had all these solutions for how to live a moral life and a happy life, and one of those was applying the golden mean. So the golden mean came before the golden ratio, believe it or not. The golden mean was the idea of moderation, and the golden ratio was the golden mean applied to aesthetics, mathematics, and geometry, finding that perfect in between, thus those perfect rectangles and those perfect Parthenons. So moving backwards now, live your life in moderation and don't go to any extremes, and you'll be happy. So only person A can know person A's thoughts, only person A can live person A's life, and only person A can believe person A's beliefs. Therefore, person A is more or less the master such God of person A's reality. I intend to say if perception is reality, and one or others can control such change when perception of the world, one controls reality itself. Especially so because verity or truth is highly subjective and malleable. What is the golden mean? According to one especially famous Greek philosopher, Aristotle, the golden mean, moral behavior is the mean between two extremes. At one end is excess, and at the other deficiency. Find a moderate position between those two extremes, and you'll be acting morally. And that's true because you know you're in the right if you give everyone a listen, and you use your deductive reasoning, you use that Cartesian doubt, that logic, to decide what is the safest path, the most correct path, not with regards to personal opinion, but to societal, just fact or safety in general. So the golden mean is moderation, and what are these solipsism-induced paradoxes? So Oscar Wilde, my favorite poet, said, the truth of the world is paradox, and he was undeniably correct. So humanity's genesis is utterly inexplicable, Genesis being our creation. Humanity's genesis is not pragmatic or sensible, the God figure either. What created what first, and how did existence rise from non-existence when the two are inarguably fused to each other? For instance, you can't exist unless you can understand what non-existence is. There has to be something for there to be nothing. They're a perfect pair, they can't exist without each other. It's like yin and yang. Therefore, it is within the utterly human and trivial self-interest to accept the human world at face value. That's solipsism. We can't prove anything. All we have is what we have, so let's just the best we can with what we have. Now, nihilists, the people that love to believe that nothing is possible and everything's sad, would shudder at what I'm about to propose. I think everyone should apply the golden mean to their lives, and that despite paradox, sadness, and the mystery of life, individuals should still attempt to optimize and refine that which they have, so that idea of moderation and morality. The penultimate method of critical analysis is analysis from a place of moderation. When we refuse variables, we refuse the opportunity for discovery. When individuals refuse discovery, individual optimization stagnates, and intellectual and variable pursuit becomes highly incestuous. That means we only learn things we want to learn from people we want to learn it from. Through accepting and applying the golden mean, one may solve all problems and one may overcome all obstacles, freeing oneself from their own paradox. Zeno's paradoxes beautifully illustrate the audacity of mankind. Zeno's observations and perceptions of the world in his time were totally incalculable and blew everybody's minds. The distance paradox later resolved via calculus, despite its proof, had many existential philosophical implications. The paradox represented not only the paradox of motion and reality as a whole, but the paradox also exemplified the immeasurable number of choices possible in a finite space or existence. The paradox is very similar to the Koch snowflake. The snowflake is one measure such moves from the center. The outward measures, or rather the fractals themselves within the snowflake, continue to shrink smaller and smaller. They continue all the same. The fractals begin to get so small that one cannot physically measure them, yet they exist and take up real world space all the same. Essentially, they are infinite as one cannot perceive them all within human lifetime, which has been dubbed finite. Now, the only differences between the Koch snowflake and the Zeno paradox exist in perspective. They're one and the same, they have the same message, yet obviously not literally, because we're talking about a snowflake and then like Achilles running after a turtle. The audacity of man is best shown through the quote from Pliny the Elder I have here, and it's such is the audacity of man that he hath learned to counterfeit nature, yea, and is so bold as to challenge her in her work. It is only man who dares by the mouth which has fed him. Solipsism tells us to accept the world / reality as it is. Reality is all we have, yet all the same humankind endeavors on the path of most resistance. We are the universe's greatest hypocrites. We preach change, morality, and utopia, yet we have none. And we spread ideas and acts of selflessness for personal gain and selfishness. We dare to decode our genesis, and we boldly each other to do the same. It is only man who believes he can be the master of all. The audacity of man is the march towards the bleak, pointless, and paradoxical horizon of knowing, and we do march. So human life is conditional statements. I talked about that earlier. If then you walk out of the house, bring your umbrella, it's raining, you're good to go. Conditionals, logic, truth tables, etc. are all very mathematical. For perspective, a whole like 1 or 2 or 3 chapters within the MAT textbook is dedicated to sections on logic and like alternative Sanskrit mathematics. So that's like Hebrew, Arabic, numerals, and all that crazy base 10 stuff. However, conditionals are mainly used in computer programming. A parallel, computers are untimely resemblant of human brains and logic. They're modeled after us, which is why we do gain a bit from taking those computer classes like CS 120. Through understanding conditionals, one can literally become a master of reality and fate. If you're preparedness, complex analysis, and simple analysis. If you're just always running through those if-then statements in your head, you're always ready for everything. The Euclidean and Gauss perspectives reinforce the Aristotelian interpretation of the golden mean, and the perspectives beautifully quantify the unfathomable subjectivity of human life perspective. The Euclidean geometrical perspective, or the flat paper perspective, asserts that all right triangles add up to 180 degrees. However, the Gauss saddle perspective holds that triangles could add up to more or less than 180 degrees. Now, understandably, this assertion does not appear very groundbreaking or awe-inspiring. However, if one steps back and views the difference philosophically and critically, one may see the power and import of perspective. For instance, that Gaussian world is a world of shapes and color like never seen before, whereas we live in the Euclidean perspective, these perfect rectangles and triangles and circles. By viewing the world without limitation, human or otherwise, one may envision truly new things. And that was really important at the time when Gauss challenged Euclid's perspective, because I think it had been like a couple centuries without anyone even considering that the world could be different or look differently. By altering perspective, one may understand new things. Walk a mile in my shoes and you shall understand. I'm sure everyone's heard that before. Perspective is the lens through which you see the world. Adopt another's lens, and for an instant you understand them, and you may have a healthy, logical, and productive discourse, interaction, etc. Apply the golden mean to intellectual conflict, and you have the aforementioned. Moderation is the key to liberation, happiness, unity, etc. So in conclusion, life is a trivial truth, and paradox is the only definite, transcendent, and perceivable entity because of man's humanity. One may endeavor to discover the genesis of man, yet what is gained from that knowledge which is sought? What appeal does logical omnipotence have in this reality predicated upon uniqueness, spontaneity, and enigma? The perfect parallel to the aforementioned point is video games and cheat codes. Video games are fun, and video games can be engaging / challenging. However, activate said cheat codes, and no one wants to play anymore. One can only simulate their brain so much before tiredness, tolerance, or boredom Again, if one knows all, what remains of this world? Humanity has no choice but to accept solipsism. Humans can know no other reality than that which is bundled with the personal sensible experience, so your own personal life between your ears here. Life is a trivial truth, and humans can only prove using deductive reasoning or contraposition. Finally, paradox is the only truth of the world. Existence came from nothing, yet it is something. Physical matter didn't exist, and then it did. It make no sense. Therefore, we will never be able to understand how, let alone why, we exist, for as long as we exist in the physical realm. Understanding, in general, is predicated on the aforementioned two. To understand is to perceive, predict, or replicate. Therefore, the idea of transcendence or a transcendent being could be sensible. If one cannot understand something, it transcends the limits of his matter, station, or potential. Therefore, it is possible that there is a reality that transcends our own. However, the kicker, it would be impossible to contemplate it because it's transcendent. Therefore, an entity could possibly know the reasons and explanations for our existence. However, with new station comes new problems, and one would have a whole other existence to decode. So it'd be like this never-ending line of figuring out each other. All in all, we will never know that which we cannot know. Therefore, individuals should optimize and refine that which they can perceive. Perception permits interaction. That's my own little quote there. I say it all the time, and I love it. I think it's so true. Therefore, perfection relative to the human spirit and society is possible, and all that is required is willpower. Okay, so that's all I have for you guys. I know it was a lot, but thank you for your time and your attention.
Can you show that your site and sources again?
Of course. So
Because you referred to Eddington a lot too.
yeah, and you know what's funny about Dorothy Edgington? Let me see, where's she at? Right here. So she has so much on all of this. Oh my gosh, but there was another site, there's another source I have. I can't remember who it was. I have to go back to my lit review to look at it. But there's like math, math drama, like Mean Girls, and this guy is like roasting her because he just didn't agree with anything she said. And I think I have a quote from him. He said like, Dorothy Charter.
So can I just make a few comments on this paper?
Yeah, of course.
Because believe it or not, I don't know if it seemed like it, but we did a lot of the same things that he referenced in his paper. I mean, not just the paradoxes and things like that. We talked about Koch snowflake, and I mentioned about Mandelbrot sets too, and how we could, computer generate fractals to go on forever. But part of this is I wanted somebody to do a project on chapter 3, and this is chapter 3. This would be a real good project on chapter 3. But part